It's also true that if without your spouse's cooperation, if you take unilateral efforts, you can make a difference, you can change the momentum. And sometimes, here's another related point, very often it's the difference that you can make. It's the unilateral efforts that you make and the difference that makes in the marriage that serves as the motivation, the inspiration for your spouse to join in the process. So while the person is often sitting back and waiting for their spouse to agree to work on the marriage, the irony is if they would just take a few steps, that's exactly what their spouse needs in order for them to be willing to join.
It's almost like they're modeling the behavior and they're showing the spouse that it is something that they really care about.
That's part of what happens, absolutely. And when marriages are in this situation, we need leaders. The marriage needs leadership, not a follower. When you stand back and say, I'm not doing it unless you do it, so you're essentially following your spouse. And since you're being critical of them, presumably you think they're behaving incorrectly in a way that's hurtful to marriage. So by you following them, so are you. What the marriage needs is leadership. Forget about what your spouse is doing. You do something productive.
Excellent. And I don't want to be redundant, but I do. It's important for me to get at the heart of this issue, because I think that a lot of times people in marriages, one person will be stepping up to be that leader, and the other person in the marriage may be kind of that energy sucker. So every time you take a step forward, they're kind of tearing you back. And I just see that in a lot of marriages. And how does somebody who is very positive and is going after it, and their spouse is kind of emotionally abusive or just kind of puts them down, how does somebody really face that and get at that?
That's a painful situation, and there's nothing that I'm going to be able to say that's going to erase the hurt or the pain of a spouse who's being mistreated. But I think in answering this question, we have to first distinguish between what we feel and what we do. So again, I don't know that there's much I can say that's going to affect how the person who's being hurt feels. But ultimately, the outcome of the marriage won't be a function so much of how they feel. It'll be a function of what they do. And in other words, how they react, how they respond to the circumstances. Unfortunately, many people that are being treated badly, since they feel bad, they also act in bad, negative, and destructive ways, which just contributes to the whole marital downfall. The key is to be able to recognize that just because you feel one way, that doesn't mean your actions have to be in alignment with those feelings. I could feel hurt and sad and neglected, but still choose to behave in a loving, productive way that causes connection between me and my wife.
Right.
And that's really the key when you're being treated badly, is to not fall victim to your feelings. Sometimes people spend too much time and energy on the feelings when really it's the actions, the gestures, the behaviors that ultimately drive the future of the marriage.
That's so well said. It's as if so often we are a slave to our feelings, and we feel depressed, so we act in ways that are depressive. So we draw the curtains, we listen to sad music, and we do the things that encourage those feelings to continue, when we could actually change our behaviors and do things that actually drive better feelings. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And just to give you some really simple examples that almost everybody can relate to, just because I'm hungry doesn't mean that I'm going to choose to eat. Maybe my father didn't come to the table yet. Maybe there's no nutritional food that's available, and so I'm going to wait until I can get to something that's healthy. Maybe I'm on a diet and have to lose 50 pounds, and I'm going to choose to act in a way that overcomes that impulse. I mean, we've all been in situations, hopefully not too often because it's not so healthy, but we've all been in situations where we feel tired, but there's a crisis. My kid needs me, they're sick, I've got to get some work done, whatever the case may be. And so I don't sleep. My impulse is to go to sleep, but my choice is to stay awake. And those are just simple examples. Here's another example that a lot of people can relate to, or they should be able to relate to. We all know how important exercise is. Now, anybody who exercises regularly has to admit that there are many instances when they don't want to exercise, right? That's the feeling. That's the impulse. But if you cave to your impulse every time, you'll end up not exercising enough. So you choose to exercise, not because you want to, not because you feel like it, but because it's the right thing to do. And by aligning your actions with your values rather than your feelings and impulses, your whole life ends up being much more productive. And this is highly applicable in marital crisis situations, because in marital crisis situations, all the feelings that people have are sending them in the wrong direction. And it's important that a person build up the strength to be able to trump those feelings with their values that leads them to act in ways that are productive.
Boom. Love it. Thank you, Mort. Well said. How do you, for me, and this is something that I had to overcome in my marriage. My wife and I have been married for almost 12 years now, and we've got 3 kids. We had 7 foster kids early in our marriage, and we had to learn on the fly. And one of the things that I brought to our marriage from my past was quite often, I would get this. So when I was a kid, my mom wouldn't give me something, or she'd yell at me, or something to that effect. And I'd go to my room and I'd cry, and then I'd feel better. But instead of like moving on, I would just kind of sit and allow it to be an issue. What I would do is then then I'd wait, and then my mom would finally cave, and she'd give me something that I wanted. So I brought that to my marriage, and my marriage, I would pout and look to get my way, and that really hurt our marriage. So how do you help people break those associations from childhood to marriage? How do you give them that kind of, how do you help them see that, and how do you help them make that shift?
Sure. So there's a kind of a couple of steps. One of the key steps, maybe the most important step to succeeding with that, is what we just discussed. It's aligning your actions with your goals, not your impulses. So our impulses, or in this case, let's call them our inclinations, come from our original training, come from our original perspective of the family dynamics we had as a child. And so we come into our marriage with these inclinations, these impulses, just kind of the way we are, because that's who we've become at that point in our life. Like you said, primarily a result maybe of the way we interacted with our parents, or the way we saw our parents interact with each other. And so from our perspective, that's just the way things are. And that's natural. Now we get into our marriage and we see that our spouse is coming from a very different place. They have very different expectations. And the impulses that we're bringing into our marriage, they're not effective. They're not working. They're getting us into trouble. And so I'm just tying this into the previous question because it is a big part of the answer to this question. A person has to have the ability to not say to themselves, well, hey, I am who I am and I can't change. That expression, which is one of my pet peeves, a leopard can't change its spots. I hate that expression, right? Why? Well, because it's true. A leopard can't change its spots. But guess what? You're not a leopard. You're a human being. The reason why a leopard can't change its spots is because it's an animal. And when we say that we can't change, we're basically saying that we're an animal. Because that's true of an animal. An animal is pre-programmed. They're completely impulsive like a child. And what's unique about a human being is that we can see those spots. We can transcend ourselves, step away from ourselves, be introspective, and observe those spots and actually make a conscious choice to behave differently, to change those spots. Now, of course, that's metaphoric, right? I mean, if you have a spot on your arm, you can't decide to change it. But I'm talking about character development. I'm talking about behaviors, things that are choices. So just because my grandfather was stubborn and my father was stubborn, and by the time I left my house, I was stubborn, that doesn't mean that for the rest of my life, I'm stuck being stubborn and my wife's going to have to suffer with that. No, My impulse might be to be stubborn. My inclination might be to be stubborn. But at the end of the day, there is something that trumps my genetic influence, my family influence, all those influences. And what is that thing that trumps everything? It is my choice. My choice trumps all of that. And I can choose to behave in a way that is not reflective of somebody who is stubborn. And so there's a few different steps in answer to your question, but one of the most important ones is what we previously discussed. The other step, maybe even comes before that, is recognition. You have to be able to see yourself honestly. You have to be able to see that some of the patterns of behaviors that you inherited from your parents just aren't working. It may be the way they were. It may be the way you emerged as a young adult. But if you are going to insist on continuing to be in that way, you're going to pay the price. There's going to be natural consequences. So part of it is just a willingness to look at yourself and be able to distinguish between, what are the patterns of behavior in my life that are effective and which ones are not effective that I have to work on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Mort. I couldn't be more thrilled to have had you on the show. Your time has been invaluable, so thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And so what I'd love for you to do is kind of tell us where we can find you,
yes.
if people are interested in really getting, I think you have CD sets, is that correct, or books? Tell us exactly what you offer and how we can connect with you.
Thank you so much. So first of all, feel free to call my office anytime, 410-764-1552. During normal business hours, my staff is available. And there's a couple of ways you can access my help. The first, the easiest, that's really a no-brainer, is I have a free report, 7 Secrets to Fixing Your Marriage. It's totally free. There's no strings attached, and it's some really great starter information. And you can sign up for that information. Just pop in your email by visiting marriagemax.com, marriagemax.com. And then you'll start to get some free help from me. If you want to take the next step, the most popular program and the most successful is the Marriage Fitness Telebootcamp. It's a multi-sensory self-help program that you can do from your home that includes CDs and a workbook and teleconferences. I'm not going to get into details. You can check it out on my website. But that's the most popular and successful program. And then I am available for house calls and one-on-one private sessions via telephone if people want to speak with me privately.
Fantastic. Mort, thank you so much. If you might hang on line just for 30 seconds, I can say goodbye to you, and we'll sign off here. Thank you, Mort.
Okay.